Hi everyone, this is Navika Chauda, a cloud engineer and a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in Developers Technologies. I warmly welcome each one of you to the 11th episode of Tech Chat with Navika, wherein today we would be talking about GitHub Copilot. And to share some valuable insights on it, we have a very prominent speaker with us today, Mr. Bill Wilder. Bill is a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in Azure category, that too for 13 consecutive years. He is an extremely experienced professional, having more than 35 years of working experience in the IT industry. And currently, he is working as a senior director in one of the financial services based company. Not only that, Bill is also an author and he's extremely passionate about sharing his knowledge with the community. And thus, he founded the Boston Azure User Group in the year 2009, which is one of the most oldest Azure user group in the world. I'm going to stop here, Bill, because you have many achievements to tell about. Thank you so much for joining me in today.
Glad to be here, Navika. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. So, without any further ado, let's get started with one of the topic that I'm very looking forward to learn about, especially from you. If we talk about coding, right, or let's say from the development perspective, we have certain expectations from our code, right? It should be efficient. It should sort of consider different type of edge cases. It should be maintainable. It should be pretty good quality code, etc., etc. And in order to achieve these different type of key factors, we have something in place now known as GitHub Copilot, about which we would be discussing today, which makes our job pretty easier in this particular field. So, Bill, to start with, do you want to give some, do you want to throw some light on what GitHub Copilot is all about for the ones who are not aware about it?
What is happening in here? So what's happening in there? I'm going to focus on VS Code, but this also not identically, but similarly would apply to other development experiences that Copilot supports, like Visual Studio, IntelliJ, Vim, and others, and I'm sure many others in the future, where the entire experience happens within your IDE, within your developer environment. So this is 100% today. This is 100% within VS Code. So I'm a developer typing in VS Code. That's the visibility that GitHub Copilot has. It basically works through plugins that you install to VS Code. Mm-hmm. But here's the flow. Everybody who's used VS Code is probably familiar with IntelliSense, where you're typing something and it notices that you're typing the beginning of some identifier, some function or method name or some variable name, and it will offer to fill it in for you, for example. It works similar to that in that you be typing along and it will suggest, like, well, it looks like you're about to write some code, except that it will give you a lot more of a suggestion, and that's a technical term, than IntelliSense will. So you could, for example, be writing the name of a function, like a very easy one to demo, fun one to demo is to just write one that checks for a number to see if it's prime. So you type in is prime, and then before you know it, you have a page of code that checks whether an input number is prime. And then you hit tab if you wish to accept it, or there's a keyboard gesture, say, to cycle through it. You might have got two suggestions to choose from. Sometimes you get more than one suggestion. So that's kind of the basic flow. There's an IntelliSense-like flow where instead of it having just an identifier in your local environment, it actually has used the plugin architecture to reach out to we'll talk a little bit about the AI in a minute probably, but reach out to the AI to say, hey, Navika just typed in is prime. What do you suggest might be a good next text for that? And it sends back the body of the function. So that's the most basic use, and that's been in place for a couple of years now at this point. There's also an additional, much more powerful a set of features that have come with what we'll call just chat. So this is a chat GPT-like user experience built into your web browser. So instead of just typing code to give instructions or to give hints basically to the AI, You can also expressly go into a chat window and ask it to do things for you. So, for example, let's take a concrete example. Suppose you have the misfortune of needing to go work on some code that somebody wrote 20 years ago. Maybe it's C# code, or maybe it's JavaScript. Maybe I wrote it and I didn't document it. I have no unit tests. It's poorly named identifiers, but you have to come and understand this code so you can make a modification to it. This is where the chat features really shine. You can say select a function in Visual Studio Code, and then it has these in the chat side. It has these what they call agents. There's an agent that understands how a project is structured and the kinds of things that go into your code. And you would do simply something like /explain, and the local experience would be that it would, and you've highlighted the function, it would take that function's code and the fact that you've asked it to be explained, and it will send that to the cloud, to the AI in the cloud, and it will send you back in text prose, like English language, an explanation of what that function does. Doesn't matter if the variables are poorly named, it can still, usually figure out what it does. Like say a sorting algorithm that doesn't, that maybe just says sort. It doesn't reveal that it's a shell sort or a quick sort, various sorting algorithms. It can still usually can figure out what it's doing and let you know. There are other features that these agents can do. So one was explain. I can also do a /doc to produce documentation, like code comments, for example. It will produce it. I look at it and I say, "Oh, that's pretty good," and I can accept it and paste it into the code that they're working on. Because nothing gets accepted into your code without you approving it.
Clicking it.
Because this is GitHub Copilot. Guess who the pilot is? Right? You're the pilot. So in this model, the Copilot doesn't make any decisions. It only brings suggestions or information. And it's up to you, the human, to decide whether the suggestion is worthy of being, becoming part of the code. Sometimes you can ask it, like when you do a /explain, you're just getting some text back. There's nothing to put in the code. There's no decision to be made there. But with things like /doc or /fix is another one. Like you might have a snippet of code that doesn't quite work. You can ask it to be fixed. So those are some of the experiences you'll find in, this is why the 55% productivity boost is there, because it provides extra tools that make it easier for you to work on a body of code. Let me close with a couple of other ones that are possible. There is a /test where you can basically ask it to generate unit tests for some code that you've specified. That's a big deal, right? A lot of developers, don't always write unit tests because we don't have time, right?
Yeah.
But maybe if the AI can help you do it more quickly, you can get it done. Or there might be, it can also help you do things like write a pull request message. It can understand, it can. I don't want to get any debates about what it really understands, I guess, but it can produce you a useful pull request message, right? That you can put in the comment or in the explanation of what you've done. That's a big time saver. And I'll also mention that you don't always have questions about your code necessarily. It isn't always understanding a piece of code or generating unit tests for example. Sometimes you might also have questions about how VS Code works. How do I do this? And it also has a separate agent, a VS Code aware agent, that can tell you how to use your programming environment. So if you're learning, or even if I've been coding for quite a long time, but I don't know every feature of VS Code, it can find it for you. That's a pretty big deal as well. So it's got quite a range of things it can help you with. And one final comment is that it only works on code that's open in your in your VS Code editor. So it's GitHub Copilot, but that doesn't mean that your code has to live in a GitHub repo, right? It can live anywhere. This is like an in-memory experience. So wherever your code came from, went to your laptop, say, and you loaded it in VS Code, that is the visibility that GitHub Copilot has.
Got it. Pretty useful tool then. Thank you so much for actually mentioning the use cases. That actually gives a practical example also, like as to how you can actually use it. But as you mentioned that in GitHub Copilot, we are the pilot and we get the suggestions, right? So let's suppose we write in the chat, as you just mentioned, if we write some natural language, right? Okay, this is what we want. Or we write some piece of code and then we get certain suggestions. So we are really, this word suggestion is getting quite repetitive. This makes me very curious to know that what is actually, if you can just maybe on a very high level tell the backend working of GitHub Copilot, as to, I'm sure it must be using some modeling language in order to analyze or predict the code that we write, or maybe a natural language that we are writing, and then it provides us with a suggestion. So what's there in between then? What's behind it?
Yeah, when you're running VS Code, there's a plugin running inside of VS Code, and it is assembling what the AI community calls prompts.
Okay.
And that's what is sent to a cloud AI service that you're really asking about. So it assembles what's called a prompt, sends it to the AI service. The AI service, crunches the numbers for less than a second or so, and then it sends back suggestions or informational. Like an explain isn't really a suggestion, I guess, but a coach writing code is a suggestion that you, as the pilot rather, need to decide to accept or not. So what is it that takes those prompts and turns them into suggestions? And what Microsoft, what OpenAI did is they basically ran an AI, they created an AI model from, as far as I can tell, like all the public available information on the internet. And it's a large language model, which is a model that deals with languages. And interestingly, it can deal very well with human languages, like we've never seen before. Like this is a new level of capability. And I'll come back to that in a second. And it can also generate code. It can understand, it can, take code as an input and give code as output. It can turn human text into code. It can turn code into human text. It can turn, and it can do combinations of those things. Like it can take your code and you can ask it to make changes to it with the chat window. So that OpenAI stuff was going on, but for specifically Copilot, there's a language model, I think it's called Da Vinci, that is for the code generation and the code understanding. And that's what powers, my understanding is that's what powers GitHub Copilot. And one more comment on the AI model, this at the recent OpenAI conference and probably at Microsoft Ignite, I'm guessing, it was announced that there's a new version of ChatGPT, the new generation, ChatGPT 4 Turbo. And I read that Copilot would be upgrading to that soon, maybe in January or Q1. So we expect Copilot to get even better. This platform model is pretty cool, right? We can all keep using our Copilot in our local VS Codes, and it's just going to keep getting better and better. One of the things I mentioned that the plugins do is they assemble prompts to send to the AI. This is an important concept. There's what we think about, what the AI community thinks about as a context window. How much context can you send? Because if I can only send a few lines of code to be considered, that's very different than if I can send a few pages of code, which is very different if I can send like an entire system, like 1 million lines of code.
Right.
So what you can do today is send, I'd say in the pages, but the context window is going up from they talk about these in terms of tokens. These prompts they get divided into tokens, but the token window is going from max of 32K, I think it is today, to like 128K with ChatGPT 4 Turbo. So so the amount of data that the AI can handle on the fly is growing and growing. It's growing. It's been 8K and below in the past. Now it's up to 32K and going to 128K. So this is this is just going to get more and more powerful into the future. Yeah. But that's a little background on how the AI fits together around exposing the Copilot capabilities.
Got it. I think that's pretty insightful explanation. Since it is a very powerful tool, as you just mentioned towards the end, and it's going to grow and grow in the future. We also have something known as GitHub Copilot extensions, right? Which sort of helps to reach at large, and like if we talk about Visual Studio Code, it has its integration with many code editors, right? And even in Azure, like we have Azure Data Studio, just as a reference. So on a high level, just considering GitHub Copilot extensions, do you want to throw some light on it and tell something more to the viewers about it, as to like a little bit of working about it, or something that you think that is necessary to be known about it?
Sure. The extension model is I guess just a side effect, right? That's one way to enable what's really going on, which is adding a chat interface to all kinds of existing or new experiences. So so you are already seeing copilots everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. They're emerging everywhere. When you mentioned Azure Data Studio, so that's a tool, it's a developer tool similar to VS Code. And those people, they're cranking SQL code all day, and they deserve a better experience too, right? They want the productivity boost. But you're also actually, here's an interesting one. There's a GitHub command line tool. Command line, you go to your CLI and you type in GH for GitHub, and then it has this set of commands. That is a command line tool that's getting a Copilot, right? So if you're wondering what the syntax is or what the features are, you just ask it. I think one of the more powerful Copilot experiences can be understood through is just the ones that relate to office work or desktop tools. These aren't developer specific things, but I think it illuminates the power of the Copilot or chat interface model, which is we missed a meet. Maybe you and I, Navika, we were in a meeting together with 10 other people, but or we're supposed to, and maybe one of us missed the meeting. What if we could ask our Copilot for the text summary of the meeting? That would be useful.
Yeah.
And we've been able to do that for a while. We've had tools that could read that could create a text transcript from audio. But what if you could also ask it? Suppose you missed the meeting. You could ask it if Bill had any action items. Just imagine that. Like, did Bill have any actions? Did Navika have any action items? Did Bill or did the meeting have any unresolved questions? Or you can ask it higher level information about this that makes the cost of you having missed that meeting decrease, which is very, very interesting. And another one is Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel have thousands and thousands of features, and nobody knows how to use them all. But if through this chat interface, you can express the intent of what you're looking for. You don't even have to know if the feature is possible, or if you have to string together 5 features to do what you're suggesting. It's actually, you're going to get a lot more work done. You can ask it for using this data, like what is the most profitable quarter in the last 2 years, and make this pie chart or this other graphic about it. It's like that's changed everything. And I know this is an area of passion for you, Navika, but there's also a lot of potential for maybe visually impaired folks to have a multimodal interface where they can talk to it, it converts it into text, and then it does the needful, what has been asked by somebody who doesn't even have the ability to see the text on screen, because most of these are, we type these commands, but it doesn't have to be typed. The AI can still do its thing. So this is probably the biggest user experience human computer interaction change that we've seen in a long time, where you textually express your intent, not know where the mouse has to go to find the feature.
Correct. Yeah, that sounds interesting. We can say then GitHub Copilot is a very accessible tool which caters to all type of audience and users.
Or the copilots generally, I would say that probably very likely will be true of. And GitHub Copilot in particular, there was an experimental audio interface, voice interface. Yeah, I don't know what's happening to that, but that would be the kind of thing that I'm sure Microsoft, which pays a lot of attention to
definitely
accessibility and enabling for different kinds of audiences, is taking a hard look at. So it'd be interesting to see what comes out of that.
Right. Well, like you mentioned about in the beginning, you mentioned about the use cases, right, of GitHub Copilot, which definitely also included the benefits in a way as to why one should go ahead with GitHub Copilot. But I'm sure in order to use and leverage all these benefits, there must be some best practices which should be kept in mind while working with GitHub Copilot. So as per your experience, you want to share some top 2 or top 3 best practices that one should follow?
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple. One is to let so first of all, you need to remember that GitHub Copilot is just another tool in your toolbox in VS Code. You don't need it to replace, like it has a method, it has a gesture to rename a symbol, rename a symbol across multiple files. Like that's probably not something that Copilot is going to be very good at, but you could use it. You could attempt to use Copilot to do that. So don't focus on using Copilot in its wheelhouse, not trying to replace all your tools. It isn't your new IDE. It's just a part of your IDE. So keep that in mind. It doesn't replace symbol rename, doesn't replace quick fix, although it works with it. It doesn't replace IntelliSense, though it's a more powerful IntelliSense. Another might be realize that you can get Copilot to probably do more than you realize at first. So for example, if you wanted to output, maybe you wanted to explain a function, and maybe your goal isn't to just understand the function, but you're trying to write some documentation that's going to go into an external. You want to write a spreadsheet for this, let's say, and you want to circulate it. Look, we have functions that do all these business operations. So let's talk, you're going to create a spreadsheet, say, or a wiki. You might ask Copilot to explain it, but put it in the format of a JSON document, like put its output in the format of a JSON document. And then it might do that, or even a CSV. Then maybe you also well, that's not exactly the JSON format that I want.
Yeah.
It's a little different. So there's a concept that the AI community calls prompt engineering, where you keep tweaking what you ask it to do to be more specific. And one of the things you can do is you can give it examples. So you can get very specific with a couple of examples that say, I want this output in this format. Here's the name of the function. Here's a short description. Here's a list of the parameters, and you just give it the JSON example or the whatever example you want. And it can get very, very compliant with your needs. So so just be aware of that. You can get it probably to do more work than you might first realize.
Yeah, it's like when you start doing the hands-on, that's when you actually get to know about the tips and tricks of using such tools.
Absolutely right. And this prompt engineering thing, there's a whole subdiscipline here where lots of people are thinking about this. There's this idea of a one-shot or a multi-shot or zero shot. Zero shot is, hey, give me the output as JSON. But one shot or two shot is you start giving it examples of exactly what you want that JSON to look like, and it will understand it. Just like a human colleague might make the same, assumptions until you give an example. Say, Bill, I want you to make it look like this. Oh, okay. Why don't you say so? There you go. The AI will do the same thing.
Yeah.
And let me give you one more example. I see Azure Data Studio, which you brought up earlier, has the IntelliSense style inline experience. It doesn't have chat. Chat is a newer experience. I'm assuming chat will be everywhere, but it isn't today. One of the less productive patterns I see is people trying to use the inline experience as if it had the chat capabilities. So if you're putting so I would see a comment that I've seen this on the internet. I've seen other people have talked about this, and it just doesn't work nearly as well. Where you put a comment that says, "Write me a function that," or "Write me some, a stored procedure that," and explain what it is. You would never write a comment like that in the real world, right? You would you wouldn't give an imperative statement, a command. You would give a descriptive statement, like this method or this stored procedure does X, Y, Z. That works if you do it the more natural way. That works a lot better than treating the inline experience as if it was a chat feature. It isn't.
As we are nearing towards the end, I think I just cannot end the podcast without this question. GitHub Copilot is doing so many activities which humans do manually, right? Just absolutely your personal thoughts. Do you anticipate that GitHub Copilot or different Copilot tools, can they actually sort of, decrease the job roles in future? Yes, we can talk about, like from the coding perspective, or in general, like for example, you told me that you gave that example of meeting, right? As humans we sort of note down all the things, or maybe we note it down somewhere in the notepad, but if that's what we get out of the co-pilots, then what are your thoughts on that?
There's a lot in the public media, in the public discourse, let's say, about AI generally and what's going to happen when the AIs make our jobs irrelevant and so forth. And I got to realistically say that's it's not going to our profession is not going to be immune to this. Certainly, the efficiencies are presumably going to be real. But I think a more interesting question is, if imagine if the development step in a sprint, let's say, so we have a backlog of stuff that we want to do. We have a sprint and we do a bunch of stuff and then we ship it. What if that development step in the middle, just to be extreme as a thought experiment, went to zero? What if we were infinitely fast because of, say, Copilot? We could instantly realize all the stuff that came off the backlog. What does that do to, first of all, then the product owners are going to be really busy, or the product team, the product people, we got to figure out how to build more stuff. Maybe you need, QA on the back end also validating more quickly, right? It messes things up a bit. But I think an interesting way to think about that, though, is this is your efficiency dividend. How do you want to spend it? Do you want to spend it by pumping more features in, or do you want to spend it by, let's say, maybe you ask your developers or the developers have more headroom to do things like write unit tests. Maybe that hasn't been a common practice, but I have some more time. I've never done it because I didn't have time, but now I have more time. I'm 55% more efficient in this inner circle. Then maybe that's another way to spend your dividend. Another way to spend your dividend might be working on some technical debt. Maybe we do a little technical debt in the sprint that we're just leaving to build up. Those are all other valuable ways to potentially spend the dividend that we get from this efficiency. Another one could be to have fewer developers. But I think it's a limiting question. If you just think about, well, if we're faster, we should get rid of people. for example. So how do you want to spend your efficiency dividend? We should all be thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And I think one line we can also say is that such tools or GitHub Copilot in general, we actually work together, right? We're working together towards the same goal and aim, and it just helps us, being more proficient, and more fast and quick in order to achieve that goal. We could think from that perspective as well and meet our deadlines. So that is also a thought process then, right?
Absolutely.
It completely depends from person to person. All right. Thank you so much, Bill. We have come towards the end of our podcast, and it was so informative and educative. It was pretty much insightful for me, and I'm sure that it's going to be the same for the audience as well who view it. And thank you so much for taking out your precious time out of such a busy schedule. Thank you so much once again. And do you want to give any signing off note?
Go try out Copilot, and there's a famous quote by a science fiction author. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. That's I believe William Gibson, and Copilot is here. Copilot is coming. We don't all use it for all things yet. So go experience the future by engaging with Copilot today and have fun.
Thank you so much, Bill, once again.
Thank you for having me, Navika.